politicians and wealthy thrive on the ignorance of the poor. To understand why housing prices are insanely high, I'm going to take you on a journey of rent control and how it makes prices go higher. During the pandemic, it wasn't necessarily rent control, but eviction control, and it had the same effect. When they passed laws, like during the pandemic, to not allow evictions or rent control laws in New York to keep prices artificially low, it tends to have the net effect of making it only affordable for the rich. If you want to build wealth, then you need to see the difference between intentions and consequences. Someone might have good intentions, but it doesn't matter if the consequences have the opposite effect. So what happens when prices aren't allowed to fluctuate freely according to supply and demand? What happens when you don't allow landlords to evict anyone? When there's a shortage of a product, there's not necessarily any less of it. During and immediately after World War II, there was a housing shortage in the US, just like during the pandemic. Even though there was no less housing, many people looking for a place to live, they had a hard time finding that place. When some people use more housing than usual, or when people stay because they can't get evicted, other people find less housing available. So with rent control, some people who would not be renting their own apartments, like young adults living with parents or elderly widowed people and so on, they're enabled by the artificially low prices that's been created by rent control to move into their own apartments or to stay where they are. Low prices, they also cause people to seek larger apartments than they normally would be living in. Do you see where all this is going? More tenants seeking more apartments and larger apartments create a shortage even when there's not any greater physical scarcity of housing relative to the population. Price fluctuations allocate scarce resources which have alternative uses, and price controls limit those fluctuations. It reduces the incentives for individuals to limit their own use of scarce resources desired by others. This is why hotels and grocery stores, they have to price gouge during natural disasters like hurricanes. If a hotel is normally $150 a night, and a hotel doesn't increase the price after a natural disaster, then what's going to happen when a family with 3 kids, when they go to that hotel? They will get 2 rooms at least, one for the adults and one for the kids. This leaves less rooms available for other families. But if the price is increased to $800 a night, that same family will reconsider getting 2 rooms. They will have to get 1 room, and another family can get another room as well. This is what happened with toilet paper during the pandemic. Since people weren't limited on how much they could buy, they bought more than they needed, which left none available for other people. Eventually, stores had to limit the number that people could buy. If they would have increased the price of toilet paper to $20, then people would have reconsidered buying up all the toilet paper in the first place. This is what happens with rent control. It's what happened with eviction control. People take up more resources than they normally would. Rent control tends to lead to many apartments being occupied by just one person. 49% of San Francisco with the rent-controlled apartments had only 1 occupant. In Manhattan, where nearly half of all the apartments are under some form of rent control, 46% of households are occupied by only 1 person compared to 27% nationwide. Normally, the demand for housing changes over a person's lifetime. When people get married and have children, they want a bigger house, but after the kids have grown up and they moved away, the parents' demand for space may decline, and it declines again when they get older and they move in with relatives. In this way, a society's total stock of housing is shared and circulated among people according to their changing demands at different stages of their lives. This sharing takes place because of the prices that confront them. Suppression of this process by rent control or no eviction laws leaves few incentives for tenants to change their behaviors as their circumstances change. It reduces the rate of housing turnover. It also makes the construction of new apartments unprofitable, so investors don't spend money to create more housing. Rent control laws often don't apply to industrial or commercial buildings, so despite severe housing shortages, the vacancy rates in buildings used by businesses tends to be very high. Landlords provide less maintenance and repair under rent control and no eviction laws, since the housing shortage makes it unnecessary for them to maintain the appearance of their properties in order to attract tenants. So housing tends to deteriorate a lot faster. Policies that try to make housing affordable to the poor has had the net effect of shifting resources toward the building of housing that is only affordable to the rich. The reason so many people without money get played is because they don't understand how the money game is actually played. They refuse to educate themselves on this type of knowledge. They just get poorer and poorer without understanding why or thinking about what they can do to stop the bleeding. The goal of a law tells you nothing about its actual consequences. Economic policies need to be analyzed in terms of the incentives they create rather than the intentions that inspired them. It's politically effective to represent rent control as a way to keep greedy, rich landlords from gouging the poor with high rents. It's politically effective to say that nobody can get evicted, but in reality, not all landlords are as rich as people think. The biggest difference in price under rent control laws is in luxury apartments. Builders only have incentives to build apartments luxurious enough to be priced above the rent control level. This leads to higher rents, and homelessness tends to be greater in cities with rent control. One of the reasons for the political success of rent control laws is that many people accept words as indicators of reality. They believe that rent control laws actually control rent, and as long as they believe that, these laws are always politically viable, as are other laws that claim such desirable goals, whether these goals end up being served or not. Politicians and the wealthy thrive on the ignorance of the poor. Understand how money flows, where it goes, how it affects your livelihood. That is how you get rich.